All right, thank you very much for coming today. This is Truth Guardians, and I'm with Chris O'Leary. Chris O'Leary is going to be is a speaker in a speaker series that is being hosted by Father Mark White, which most of the Truth Guardians already know Father Mark because he's going through a suspension and a possible removal from the priesthood. And one of the things that Father Mark has done over the last year or so since he's been suspended is he's been reaching out to some of the survivors, the sexual abuse survivors of the priesthood acting badly, let's put it that way. And Chris O'Leary comes from St. Louis, and he's from the St. Louis diocese, and he's got a very, very interesting story to tell us. And hopefully, a lot of you people came to the talk that Chris did with Father Mark, both in Martinsville and in Roanoke. So, Chris, welcome. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for telling your story. And I'm gonna try to lead you through it as well as I can. And I've got a lot of interests. I'm very curious. So hopefully you'll be open to all our questions and to try to understand a little better about what you went through at a very, very young age, and just be as open and honest as you possibly can, and we'll try to be as sensitive and understanding as we can as viewers. So thank you very much for coming and putting in the time.
No, thanks for the interest.
First thing I'd like to know is just tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell our viewers a little bit about who was Chris O'Leary when you were 5 or 6 or 7? I mean, when all of us are hoping that you enjoyed your childhood and everything was going great.
I was just a regular kid, smart, probably upper middle class. My dad was a lawyer. My mom stayed at home and raised us. I've got 2 younger brothers. I'm the oldest of 3. Very adventurous. We lived across the street from a creek, and we were always playing in the creek, and crawdads and rats. Don't tell my mom about the rats. But just we would spend our whole summer in the creek and making movies and just doing kind of regular stuff, just very stereotypical boy stuff. Lived about half an hour or half a mile from Immaculata, our parish, the Church of Immaculata, which is in Richmond Heights, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis, just kind of up the hill. We went to, I went to the Immaculata grade school. We went to.
That was Catholic school?
Yeah, Catholic school. So we went to mass 6 days a week. The only day we got. Okay. Yeah, we were.
I remember that my kids went to a Catholic school.
Right.
That was probably their least favorite part of it, every morning going to mass.
It was fine, but it was a lot of masses. I have some troubles with mass now, and I'm hoping I get a little bit of credit for all the times I went as a kid. So,
right.
But it was just it was very normal, very ordinary. I don't think I had much in the way of emotional problems. I think I was pretty typical. I think I was pretty popular.
Okay.
And then in 4th grade, a guy named Father Leroy Valentine showed up, and that changed everything. So,
okay, what was your first reaction? Now there was an elderly priest in the church at that time.
Yeah, so Father Valentine made the 3rd priest. So there was our pastor was Monsignor Cornelius Flavin.
Okay.
The 2nd priest who'd arrived a year earlier, straight out of the seminary in '76, was Father Timothy Dolan.
Okay. All right. That name sounds familiar.
Yeah, that's the Cardinal Archbishop of New York.
Okay.
So I've known Dolan since I was in 3rd grade.
And he was fresh out of the seminary, so he came to. And was the parish named Immaculata also?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Church of the Immaculata.
Okay.
So Dolan came in '76, and then Valentine came in '77, again straight out of the seminary.
Wow.
So there were 3 priests in the rectory, and I make that point in part because this is well before any priest shortage. We had a full rectory, and
right. Yeah,
It's
I was going to ask. I said that seems really weird that you would have two young priests in the same parish. Now, was this a really, really big parish? Was there a reason why, or was it just because they had a lot of priests?
I don't know exactly. It was a relatively big parish, relatively powerful, kind of on the edge of one of the higher end suburbs in St. Louis.
Okay.
Uh, Stan Musial went to Immaculata.
Oh wow.
I mean,
You got my baseball nerve there.
right, right. So there was another parish kind of more in the heart of the wealthy areas, but this was still a fairly wealthy area, still fairly powerful. I was writing about this today, how, you know, we always had one guy who was kind of a big deal. Uh, we had a bishop there for 10 years or so after, when I was in high school, we had a bishop there, and I remember serving for the bishop a few times. So, it was a convenient place to live, 15 minutes from the basilica and all the offices and everything. And I don't, you know, I was just a kid. I don't know all the politics and everything, but
Right, right. But you said you served with the bishop, so you were an altar boy?
yeah. So we started at Immaculata. We started serving in fifth grade. So that would be the fall of 78. So Father Valentine got there in the fall of 77, and then I started serving in the fall of 78.
Okay.
Uh, and then I served from fifth grade through eighth grade. I don't think I served much in high school. I may have served in high school every once or so. There was a hierarchy, and every once in a while they'd bring in the high school guys to serve if you had a big deal mass and they wanted more senior guys. But
Right, right.
I think I mostly just served through grade school.
Okay. All right. Now, so most of the time that you were an altar boy, you were serving with either Father Dolan or Father Valentine. Is that
Right.
correct?
Or Monsignor Flavin.
Monsignor Flavin. Okay.
And although I think it was more Valentine, uh, Dolan and Flavin would get the kind of fancier masses.
Okay.
Valentine would get the
The everyday,
right,
yeah, I gotta do it. Somebody's got to go do it.
right.
Was there a pecking order between Dolan and Valentine? It sounds like they came out of the cemetery almost simultaneously. Was Dolan seen as a more senior member of the parish?
Yeah, I mean, he did have a year of seniority, and he was seen as a bigger deal. He was always seen as a big deal. I remember, so Dolan came to visit my third grade class. My first memory of a priest is Dolan coming to my third grade religion class to talk about Mark 8:22 through 26, which is Jesus healing the blind man at Bethsaida, where Jesus has to do it in two steps. And don't tell the Protestants, but I was always taught that it's because Jesus made a mistake after the first attempt and then had to do it again. But apparently that's not what the Protestants
No.
believe. Uh, but I remember that story because Dolan chose me to play the role of Jesus. Uh,
Okay. All right.
so I
Wow.
remember, doing a little skit and acting it out. So that'd be third grade, but that made an impression on me about Dolan, and it was a big deal to have a priest in the school. There was kind of a line between, the church was where the priests were, and the school was kind of the nuns. And this was a school that was run by the nuns, and the priests had their fiefdom and the nuns had their fiefdom.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that. I went to Wednesday. We had religious education, and you never saw a priest in the church. It was always the domain of the nuns and the lay teachers and everything. So that's interesting. That brings back a memory that seems to make a lot of sense. That they both had their own kind of fiefdoms.
Right, and that's relevant to kind of when people started noticing stuff. That was kind of how that was a distinction that was made by Monsignor Flavin about, Sister Helen should worry about what happens in the school and not what happens anywhere else.
Oh wow. Okay.
Monsignor Flavin's, it's Monsignor
Yes.
Flavin's job to worry about this, and she should worry about the school. If it doesn't
Right.
happen in the school, it's none of her business.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
So there
Okay.
was there was some tension there.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And I kind of remember that. I kind of remember that when when the priest came anywhere near the school door, it was kind of like, is he coming in? Because he's not. We're
Right.
just we're just gonna kind of stand in the door and tell him to, go
Well, and,
back.
and that was one of the things that was different about Father Valentine is he kind of crossed that line. He would come into the school and he was a lot more friendly,
Right,
whereas Dolan would come in monthly, Valentine would be in there daily or weekly. So
right,
there was something very different about Father Valentine. He did things that the other two priests didn't do.
right, right.
And
And
that
that
made
was,
an it
yeah,
made
that
an
was
impression on us as
attractive,
kids.
wasn't it? I mean, that
Right.
was it. It was just, here's a big guy. He's a priest, and he's paying attention to me, and he's paying attention to all the other kids and everything. That sounds like a pretty cool deal.
Right, right. That definitely made an impression. And then that gets into, you know, so in terms of what happened, uh, well, and we should talk about, grooming and that whole process. And so people talk about grooming is a term that's used a lot in the abuse process, and I
Right.
definitely was groomed. But one of the things I'm trying to add to the vocabulary is the idea of testing,
Yeah,
where
explain a little bit about that. So when he would come into into the school, he came in for a purpose in your mind.
right, and he would also there were other things that he would do. Jumping ahead a little bit,
Hmm.
so when I first met Valentine, that would be in fourth grade before I was serving. But there were other ways that he would test us and groom us, which included having kids over to the rectory for pizza and to play board games and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And it seems like the way that process worked is that he wouldn't groom everybody, he would first test you. So the events in the rectory were his attempt to figure out who was worth grooming and who was not.
Gotcha. Who
Who,
was worth the
who
investment in the
right,
grooming?
right.
Okay,
Who caught on to it.
yeah, just let me ask you a question though, okay? Because I remember this. I had a whole bunch of priests that were involved in my life, mainly as coaches, because I used to play, we used to call it CYO,
Yeah.
Catholic Youth Organization. I used to play baseball, I used to play softball with them. A lot of the priests got involved in the coaching and everything. Was it unusual at that time to have kids come into the rectory and play board games with the priests? Or is that just kind of something it was just kind of what was done and nobody worried about it? Or what's your
No, that
recollection of that?
my recollection is that was a big deal. I remember it being a really, really, really big deal, like unprecedented, something had never happened before. It had never happened in my entire experience at Immaculata. I don't think I'd ever been in the rectory. Again, there were these lines,
Right.
uh, and
But
suddenly,
did the parents care about it? Did the other kids think it was cool that you were able to play board games with a priest? I mean, how was it? Was it perceived as creepy, or was it perceived as just, boy, that's amazing? That's,
no,
they
it
must,
was
must
it was
really like
amazing.
these altar
Yeah,
boys.
it was amazing. It was an honor. It was a privilege. The thought of the parents was, I mean, how could a kid be in any place that's any
Right.
safer
Could there
than
any
with a priest?
Right? Could there be any place safer? That's
Right.
great. I'm glad he's taking an interest. All that. Okay. Yeah,
Right.
because that would be the way that I would have seen it in my day. And we're about the same age. I'm a little older than you are, but it's kind of the same kind of vibe. Okay,
Right.
so go on. So you went to one of these pizza parties or board games or
Well, and let me jump back for a second. So at the same time, this is fourth. I think it's fourth grade. We had the idea of face-to-face confession.
okay,
So I remember going to the dark, scary room some number of times. Didn't
right,
like it. Thus my term, dark, scary room.
right,
And as soon
right,
as they offered the option of face-to-face confession, I snapped that up.
okay,
And I went with Father Valentine. And the way it worked at Immaculata was you had the cry rooms in the back of the church.
hmm,
And
yep,
what they would do is they would draw the curtains. So it was very private.
Hmm.
Uh, they'd move all the chairs into the corner of the room, and there would just be two chairs in the middle of the room, one for the priest and one for you.
Okay.
I don't remember specific episodes of abuse, but I do remember lots of hugging and touching and contact and all that kind of stuff. I know people have told worse stories of having been physically abused during
Mm.
face-to-face confession, but there was definitely a lot of contact between Father Valentine and me. You'd enter the room and you'd get a hug, and when you're
Hmm.
confessing, he's touching you on the leg and touching you on the back and touching you on the head and that kind of stuff. And then definitely when you would go, there'd be this long, kind of lingering, awkwardly long hug that would
Hmm.
go on for like, it felt like 10 or 15 seconds.
Right.
I don't remember any of the worst stuff, uh, but I do remember, I mean, I was ambivalent about it because on the one hand, you felt like you were being personally forgiven by God. Uh,
Right.
but on the other hand, there was this kind of developing sense of, kind of squirminess and creepiness. But I don't think even in seventh grade, I don't think I had a definitive sense of this is really weird. Uh,
Mm.
and to go to the point of my family and how this is relevant. So my dad was a lawyer. I think part of what happened is he was trying to make partner at the time, so he was working his tail off. He
Mhm.
also had developed some kind of strange ideas about men don't hug. So
Right.
I went through this period where I think I was craving adult male contact.
Right. Right.
And,
Yeah,
and
let me just add something to that. I was going to ask you the question on whether your father was physical with you. And it sounds like he wasn't, and that was
correct.
very common from people, our age. And I relay the story that when eventually I got to the point where I had children, and I understood how important that physical touch was with my daughter and my son. The first time I grabbed my dad, the way I describe it, it was like grabbing a refrigerator. It was kind of like it was just like there was a block there. His hands were at his sides. He didn't want any part of it.
Right.
And luckily, at the end of his life, which was like 30 years later, we were kissing each other on the lips, and he appreciated the closeness. So some of this has to do with the fact that fathers and sons were just not huggy and feely and all that kind of stuff. So I understand that completely.
Right. And
So
Father,
you
so
yeah
I'm going at the phase where I'm kind of craving it, and Father Valentine is
yes,
giving me so.
yes, he's giving you what you want, although nowadays it looks creepy from a perspective, but at that time it was probably very beneficial to you, at least until the point where it goes beyond that, I'm guessing.
Well, and as I got older, the word I've used talking to the archdiocese is ambivalent. On the one hand, I like the contact. On the other hand, it would get a little weird, but it never got weird enough
Right.
that I stopped it. So
Right.
I wanted it more than it bothered me is
Yeah,
kind of the way to put
exactly.
it.
Exactly.
So
Okay.
that's
So
that's
so
that's
when
how it started.
Yes. So there was a pizza party and a game in there somewhere too.
Right.
Was it
So
was that after kind of the first confession where you did it in the cry room, or
yeah,
how does
so
it?
this is so first confession, I was probably 10, I might have been 9 depending on when my birthday was, but so I'm 10 years old, 4th grade. Uh the pizza party is right around like October, November time frame. He had 4 of us over, me, T, A, and R.
Okay,
And
and are those when you do that, or you have a picture that people saw at the speaker session? Um, some of these people have come forward.
right.
In fact, I remember you did a recent or a radio program with one of these young people that was
Yeah,
that was
that's a different guy. That's the flannel shirt guy. If you look at the pictures
good
I'm
guy,
holding, that's the flannel shirt guy.
right? But that's why you're still using those
Right.
uh, ambiguous titles so that they can protect their privacy if they choose not to come forward.
Well, and I've been authorized to use the flannel shirt guy's name, but everyone else, I'm
Gotcha.
going to refer
Okay.
to as the number shirt guy, and
Right.
because some of these guys, I don't know their status. I haven't,
Right.
and it bothers me because I haven't seen them in 40 years. So,
Right.
God only knows what happened. Like some of these guys, they left St. Louis and never came back. They never come to any reunions or anything. So God only knows what that means.
Well, and they have a right to their own
Right.
memories and what they want to do with them. So I honor that. I think that's a good way of going about it. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, and I should mention that because the Archdiocese of St. Louis has accused me of not respecting victims, and that's not the case. I am very careful with victims' privacy.
Right.
So, but I'm just trying to be extra careful with that because I've been accused of it by the Archdiocese.
Right. Right.
So there are four of us. It's probably early to mid-November, fall of '77. I'm 10. We're in the rectory. Father Valentine has us over to eat Pantera's pizza and then play board games in the rectory. And this is stuff I've always remembered. And these are some of my fondest memories of childhood and forever where I felt special and singled out, and this is a big deal. And I
Right.
remember being in the car and dashing into the rectory and how cool this was and how amazing and what an honor it is, and all that kind of stuff. But I have one memory of sitting at the table in the kitchen of the rectory playing Risk, and uh, A is to my right, uh, R is across from me, and then there's an empty seat to my left where T would be, and but T's not there, and he's never there in that memory. And I think, well, so this gets into something called an idea called wrestling, uh, and this gets into the testing versus grooming thing.
Hmm.
So the way he would test us. So earlier that night, I think we ordered the pizza and then we went down the basement so he could teach us how to wrestle. Talked about this 100 times that it never gets easier. Uh,
Just take your time.
yeah. So we went down into the basement of the rectory, and he would have us pair up and taught us the basics of wrestling, how to flip a guy. And the thing I remember, and I don't remember wrestling, but the thing I remember is that, so I'm on the bottom and someone else is on top trying to flip me. And this guy tries to flip me by grabbing me up by the knee. And and I don't know whether that's the right technique or not, but Father Valentine gets all upset and he's like, you're doing it wrong. What you need to do is you need to grab the guy down by the butt. So Father Valentine has the guy get off of me. Father Valentine gets on top of me, and this is standard wrestling positions with, everybody's the bottom guy's on all fours and the other guy's kind of above him,
Right.
standard wrestling starting position.
Hmm.
But then Valentine goes to flip me, and his hand slips. And he doesn't just touch me on the leg down by my butt, he touches me down there. And that happens a couple times. And I think what was happening is he was testing me to see whether I would notice or react to that.
Right.
Because to the pictures that we've talked about, I've talked about this memory with the number shirt guy. And number shirt guy didn't come to the school till like 7th grade or something. And Valentine tried that on number shirt guy when he was in 7th grade, and number shirt guy almost threw him across the room.
Oh, wow.
Number shirt
Okay.
guy was a big guy who got big fast. But Valentine tested him, and number shirt guy failed the test.
Right.
But I didn't fail the test. I just froze. And it was like an electric shock, It was like an electric shock, and I did not like being taught like that. But instead of reacting negatively, I just kind of froze. And
Yeah.
there are these things in my head, these voices in my head saying, "Dude, it's a priest. What do you? This isn't anything. This is just an accident. Don't make a big
Right.
deal out of this." that kind of stuff. So,
Let me just ask one question, not to be insensitive, but you said his hand slipped.
right.
Okay. At this stage of your life, do you believe that that was a conscious gesture that at that time you just said, he's trying to make it as innocuous as possible that his hand slipped, but you knew what he was doing at this stage?
Well, I know what he was doing now. I didn't know what he was doing at the time,
Right,
but
right,
his hand slipped multiple times.
right,
Every time he wouldn't do it the right way, his hand would slip.
right. So you unfortunately fell into the worth the investment to groom
Right, right,
column.
right.
Okay. So how did this proceed from that point? And we'll go
Well,
back we'll go
yeah,
back because I think one of the things that you had mentioned when we had talked previously is that you still have an anxiety over board games,
right,
which is one of the things that I want our listeners to understand, that there are things that we have done in the past that may be so traumatic that our minds got to the point where we're saying, okay, this is going to affect you in the future, but you're not going to know why.
right.
You're just not going to like board games for a while because the first time one of your best memories was a board game and it didn't turn out real well. You
Right.
know,
No, and I had this thing where I was 35 or 40 and we had another couple over to play board games and I just completely melted down. And the thing is I turned into a 10-year-old child with my wife and another couple and I'm behaving completely inappropriately and my
right,
wife and I had this huge argument and I embarrassed and humiliated her and everything and I'm like, I don't know what the hell happened. I don't know what
right,
the hell that was. And
mhm,
I didn't connect it to any of the Valentine stuff. I just, you know,
right. Just happened. Just your
right.
mind was saying, I don't understand this. I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. And,
It
just freak out moment.
it bothered me as much as it bothered her, but I didn't have any control over it.
Right. Right.
But
Okay.
okay,
So
so
how did this relationship with Valentine extend beyond what you have told us so far?
well, so I don't know if it's the same night. It could have been the same night. I have another memory, and I've mentioned that T was missing from the table. I
Hmm.
think what happened is that at least T and I were taken into the TV room where he would take us one at a time at the TV room. Because again, my memory is me and two other guys playing Risk at the table, but the seat to my left is empty. And Valentine's not there playing board games.
Right.
And that's kind of weird. Three kids playing board games in the kitchen of the
In the
rectory. What the
rectory, yeah, with the
right,
priest not there. I assumed that the priest was there enjoying the
right.
game with you guys, but he was
Now,
he was off doing whatever he was doing in another
right.
room.
And I think what he was doing is he was further testing us or grooming us in the TV room because I have a memory of a kind of rectangular room with an old cabinet style TV on the floor, a sofa across from it, big windows, and then he's either sitting or lying on the sofa. And this is a fuzzy memory and it just kind of fuzzes out, but I think
Right.
he was doing stuff to me on that. And I think the same thing, it wouldn't surprise me if the same thing happened to T.
Right.
Uh, so that's one phase of the testing and the grooming. There was another phase that definitely happened at a different time. So when I went public in April 2018, I got a direct message later that night from a guy who said uh, that Valentine used to take him up to his room, to Valentine's room in the rectory, and give him haircuts. And I don't remember. I remember being up in Valentine's room. I don't remember what the excuse is, although like a month earlier, I had tweeted about how at this time of the year I had this thing about my hair and I wanted to cut all my hair off. And my hair, whenever my hair would get long, it would creep me out. Because when I was a kid, I had long kind of, it was the 70s.
Hmm. Yep.
You know, I had long hair, and whenever my hair would get longer, it would creep me out. And I didn't like having long hair. You can see how long my hair is now.
Mhm.
Uh, there's reason for that.
So are you drawing a connection to the fact that you may have gotten one of these haircuts from
Right.
Valentine? That
Uh,
was one of his grooming methods, and we're talking
Right.
about real haircuts. We're not talking about
I
or
don't I don't know. I think he was I just remember being up in Valentine's room and sitting on the bed with him. And this is where it gets this is where it gets bad because this is where Dolan gets involved. And this
okay,
guy's direct message to me said the same thing that I remember, which is that so at the same time these risk and pizza parties are going on, Monsignor Flavin is in the rectory, like in his room or something. Dolan's in the rectory in his room or something. I remember them being around. I don't remember them really interacting with us, but so this stuff is happening at the same time as there are other priests in the rectory.
right. Now, is the rectory big, or are they like three bedrooms on the same floor? How
Yeah, yeah.
so they're
There's
all in close proximity. They should
right,
know what's going on. There's a TV room or something that they all shared.
right,
Is that
right.
the kind of the setup?
It's big, but it's not that big. You know, it's kind of like it's like a small dorm room where on the first floor you've got a kitchen and a formal dining room and then an office and like a multi-purpose room, that kind of stuff. And
Right,
then like a parlor, and then upstairs you've got three bedrooms and a bathroom, and I think the TV room was upstairs in one of the corners. So, but
right,
you got three priests kind of living in close proximity, and that's what this other guy's direct message to me said was, he would be in Valentine's room getting haircuts, and Dolan would be walking around and seeing stuff, and I had the same memory of Dolan seeing stuff, of Dolan seeing me on Valentine's bed and Valentine, you know, talking to me and whispering me. And one of the reasons I didn't think it was a bigger deal is because Dolan would see it and didn't react negatively to it.
sure, sure,
Right. So if you see an adult, you might be ambivalent about something, but if you see an adult and the adult sees it and doesn't think it's a big deal, well, then obviously that means it's not a big deal. And
right,
you do that when you're a parent with your kids, is if
right,
your kid gets a bobo and you overreact to it, then they're going to react to it. And if you're like,
right.
this is no big deal, the kid's like, this is no big deal.
Right. Well, and we're dealing with, decades of experience that we didn't have back then.
Right, right,
Kind of like nobody would ever have thought that any of this stuff would have gone on,
right,
when I was growing up in the 60s and the 70s. It would have been, oh, there's a priest with a bunch of kids playing baseball in the park.
right.
That's great. I mean, that's wonderful,
Well, although I will say, all right, so here's the problem. So within a week of Valentine's coming to Immaculata, Mrs. Glarner, who ran the after school program, went to Sister Helen and said, there's something wrong with this Valentine guy.
Mm,
So Sister Helen's our principal.
okay.
And then Sister Helen went to Monsignor Flavin, and she's like, I'm having multiple moms telling me there's something wrong with Father Valentine.
Wow. So she picked something up. She
Right.
understood.
Right. And it was mostly Mrs. Glarner who picked up on it, because I think what happened is, so Mrs. Glarner was the one who was in the gym with us, and what would happen is Valentine would come into the gym and wrestle with kids in the gym for the kids who stayed after school in the after school program.
Okay.
Because school would get out at 2:30 or I guess 3 o'clock, and then some kids wouldn't get picked up till five
Yeah,
o'clock or
yeah, you
six
have to
o'clock.
hang around until mom and dad picked you up at 5 or whatever.
So
Now, was there a
Valentine,
wrestling program? I mean, why wrestling other than the fact that there's physical touching between men and boys? Is that
yeah,
was there
that was
was there a program of wrestling? Was he trying to create a wrestling? Was he a coach? I mean, it was just there's a mat here, let's pull the mats out and let's roll around on the floor together.
right. There was nothing organized to it. There was no CYC wrestling program. There was no pipeline or anything like that.
Okay.
That was the only wrestling I did until high school.
Okay.
And that's one of the things that's really kind of frustrating about it, is there was very little subterfuge. There was very little, you know, there was no pretext to it.
Yeah.
he didn't start the youth wrestling rangers program. He
Right.
just kind of randomly wrestled with kids, and apparently he would do so in these really short shorts. I mean, it's the 70s, but he's in short shorts and there's a bulge, and Mrs. Glarner
Right.
sees it like that, and she's like,
Right.
"No,
So she suspected something. She just said this is crossing
this
the
is wrong.
line in my
Right,
view.
this is wrong." But so she goes to Sister Helen, and I've talked to Sister Helen like 2 years ago. I met up with Sister Helen and talked to her about some of this stuff. My mom actually tried to talk to Mrs. Glarner, and Mrs. Glarner wouldn't talk to her. But so Sister Helen, our principal, went to Monsignor Flavin, our pastor, and said, "I'm getting these reports. There's something wrong with Father Valentine. He's doing this stuff and it's weird and it's freaking people out."
Hmm.
And Monsignor Flavin's response was, "Where did this happen?" "All right, it happened in the gym." And he's like, "Okay, your responsibility is the school. If something happens in the school, that's your responsibility. If anything happens anywhere else, that's my responsibility and it's none of your business."
Wow. Now you said you've talked to her just a couple years ago. Is she still kind of the same persona that says, I
Now,
can't believe he actually told me that, and what was I supposed to do with it? I mean, what
now
did
she
she do
was
with that kind of
well,
information?
so she was a nun and she left the order like 10 years later.
Okay.
Still, she was in the Sisters of St. Joseph. Uh, she left the order, stayed in education. Uh, but my and this goes to Father Mark. Father Mark has been given what I would regard as an illegal, if not an immoral, order,
Right.
and he refuses to follow an illegal or immoral order. Sister Helen was given and followed that order, which is very frustrating, needless to say.
Right.
Although, she's a nun and they've got, if you were a nun and were thrown out of the order in the 70s, I would imagine you would feel like you were screwed. Although, Sister Helen ended up leaving voluntarily and just worked as a standalone principal in Catholic education, no big deal.
Hmm.
Uh,
Do you
but
know why she left? That would be an interesting question to ask her. Do you know?
it was related to all this stuff.
Okay. She just
She
felt
couldn't
that it
she couldn't
wasn't
do it.
the organization was not protecting the people they needed to protect, and she was out of
Well,
there.
it wasn't, and it was not just how they were treating the kids, but also how they were treating the priests, where they were well, and some of this was so they were coddling the priests. The nuns were at the beck and call of the priests. The nuns were the servants of the priests.
Right.
And
Right.
she's like, I think her attitude was, I didn't sign up for this.
Right.
I didn't sign up to be anybody's maid.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I can relate to that. I
Right,
mean, that
right,
was it was worse than the doctor nurse relationship.
right, right.
Where there was just no respect, and you're not as great as I am, and you just stay in your little world and play whatever you're going to do and stay away from mine. So yeah,
And
I can kind of understand that
there was
thought.
a lot of contempt, and it was open contempt. And you know and
Hmm.
Sister Helen, she wore a habit when she first started out, but then she stopped wearing the habit. And these priests, and this is why, I think a lot of people think that devotion and getting more devout and getting more conservative will fix all the problems. And the people that I knew, Monsignor Flavin, his brother Bishop Flavin, these were some of the most devout people that you will ever see, and they were just letting everything go.
Hmm.
They,
It,
they refused to do anything. These are extremely devout people who were just turning a blind eye to everything.
right. Right. Yeah. I don't understand any of that. Okay. So you had these experiences with Father Valentine. Um, how did that change your childhood? Okay, because I want to eventually get into, the memories and how did these come back? And you've already said that some of them have not come back completely.
Right.
You still have gaps, and you still have things that you're anxious about or you feel terrible about, but you can't really formulate a memory that is realistic in your head. how did that change your childhood, your early teen years?
Well, it affected me immediately in grade school, where I went from one of the, I was smart, top of the class. I went from being very confident to being very timid and obsessive, and I was popular. Suddenly I became weird.
Okay.
Uh, well, and this was, you know, I became obsessed with digging and building forts, and while my other kids were, or while my other friends, through fourth grade and fifth grade, they were getting into girls and that kind of stuff. I was obsessed with forts and digging these forts, and
And
I
why is
became
that? Have you come to any kind of understanding about why? Because that sounds like security. It sounds like I need
right,
to hide or I need to be protected, or is that
right.
where
I
that?
needed, yeah, I needed a place to hide. The movie Hogan's Heroes, where they had this underground layer. I basically
Yeah.
built one of those, and
Okay.
with a trap door and everything.
Okay.
And we would do that as we got older. We would start, hitting cars with crab apples and that kind of stuff. When people would stop and get out of their car and yell at us and chase us,
Right.
we would pop into the fort. But when I was a kid, I just wanted someplace where I could go and hide and feel safe, and where nobody knew where I was.
Okay. And
Uh,
were you more of a loner at that time, or did you have other kids that were okay? So you started to isolate yourself
yeah,
and try
no,
to.
that was very distinct. Like I said, I was very popular, and I lost a lot of friends. I immediately lost a lot of friends because became really kind of obsessive and weird and withdrawn, and went from being, you know, popular to being a loner. And it's very distinct. I can think about friends who cut off relationships with me and what it was like before and what it was like after. And
Mhm.
to a degree, I chalked a lot, and I think in my parents' defense, I think they chalked a lot of that up to adolescence. Fifth grade, sixth grade can be
Right.
tough, but it was more than it was more than that. It was, you know, I was having mental health issues. I was becoming obsessive. I was having real difficulties. And the hard part is, I've been asked by my therapist, in the past 10 years ago, what did your doctor say? And unfortunately, my parents never took me to the doctor. They started, and so the face-to-face confession, I think, started in fourth grade. The Risk and Pizza Party was definitely in fourth grade. I started immediately reacting to the point where my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Martinego, noticed stuff and started telling my parents about it. And unfortunately, they never took me to a doctor, much less a child psychologist. So,
Right.
but my teach in this, it's very frustrating. It's difficult to handle. But my dad was a lawyer. My mom was, a math teacher. Neither one of them were psychologists. But
Well, and
it's
frankly, during that time,
right,
there weren't child psychologists running around taking care of kids.
right,
If the parents couldn't figure it out, they would just let the kids, go do whatever they're going to do anyway. I mean,
right. Work it out.
yeah, I mean, it was a work ethic thing, or it was, it's a phase, they'll get out of it, or I mean, there weren't. I mean, I had plenty of childhood, playmates that were having issues
Right,
today that would be taken to a therapist in a minute. That
right.
back then it was kind of like, well, they'll figure it out, so
They're just
that's kind
going
of.
through a phase.
Have you taken your parents off the hook for?
I I try to, as much as I can. Everybody's doing the best they can. As a
Right,
parent of four kids, I know what it's like. And you get four kids, and you're busy as hell, and
right,
there's only so much that a person can do. And to a degree, you're counting on your teachers and the administrators to,
right,
well, to do their job, basically.
right, right,
This could have been caught at multiple places, and it wasn't. People blew it off. So
right, right. Well, and the sad thing about this, and one of the things that I want to make sure that that people understand is that you're not an isolated case. It's
Right.
not Father Valentine with Chris O'Leary. It's Father Valentine with a whole bunch of other people,
Well, and he
most
was
most of
right. So
which
that,
probably never came forward, that may be dealing with problems
right.
that they've never even tried to solve, but have been creating real problems for
Right.
them and their families in the future. So it's
Right. As far as I can tell, he went after everybody he could get his hands on. He tried stuff with literally everybody. He tested everybody.
right,
So if you want to talk about a body count, I think I could give you 100 people just at Immaculata.
right.
And he was at, like 7 other parishes.
Right. And the other thing that we know about this predator behavior is that it doesn't just stop. I mean, it's
Right.
not like I'm going to pray and it's going to go away. That most of these people don't have the faith to escape a sin like was committed against you and other people. I mean, that
Right.
it's just something that once it's identified, it goes on for forever until the person meets their own judgment. So I mean, it's not something that just stops. That
Right.
people just. Okay, so tell me a little bit about. Okay, so we're not in therapy yet, but as you get into later in your like your high school years, did you carry a lot of this with you, or was this an ongoing abuse situation? How long did this last, and did you get out of it at some point where you were able to have at least a semblance of a normal childhood or young adulthood?
Well, okay, so Father Valentine ended up leaving in 7th grade. And this is kind of confusing. So I actually had a really good 8th grade year,
Okay. So he
which
left in your seventh grade.
he left after 7th grade. So
Okay.
he
Were
was
you
not there
glad
for
when he
8th.
left? Did you go, this is opening up, or did it make a difference? Did it matter to you at that point?
It didn't register, but it made a difference. It made a very obvious difference,
Okay.
but it didn't register.
Interesting way of saying that. So,
And to a degree, I lost like a father figure and I lost the kind of special times, but part of me knew that, okay, this is a good thing. You
right.
know, it's
Right.
it's sad that you don't get to go on these trips anymore. You're not going to the mud cave trip anymore, but I felt differently.
Okay. Now tell me about the mud trip, the mud, the cavern trip. Was that
Yeah.
close to the time when he left, or
Yeah, that was December 26th, 1980. So about 6 months, but 5 or 6 months before he left. And
okay?
that actually, so there's a federal law called the Mann Act, which makes a crime out of transporting kids across state lines for illicit purposes. To my
Okay.
knowledge, he never took me across state lines, and everybody else I've talked to from Immaculata, it was either down Highway 44 or down Highway 55 within Missouri. But when
Okay.
he was stationed in northern St. Louis, he took guys into Illinois,
I get
to Pere Marquette Park, which actually makes it a federal crime. And getting into Spotlight and everything, that in the Spotlight article, or the Spotlight era article in which Valentine is named, a federal crime is described.
Oh,
But it
really? Okay.
yeah, but it was never, to my knowledge, it was never prosecuted by the FBI, never followed up by the FBI.
Let me ask you this, because I didn't, I truly don't know. Is Father Valentine still alive?
No, he died. COVID got him a year ago.
Okay, so a year ago. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So tell me a little bit about the cave. Was there any funny business going on with the cave trip?
Well, and this is my first negative memory. The cave was just caving and, caving stuff. But on the ride back, I got shotgun. And this is our white station wagon with like a dark blue or black interior, bench front seat. So number shirt guy, flannel shirt guy, and number shirt guy's dad are all in the back seat. I'm seated next to Father Valentine. Father Valentine's driving. And I ended up waking up kind of with a start from a nap, turn my head and look at Father Valentine, and I'm overtaken by a wave of like disgust. I just wake up, open my eyes, look at him, and I just see him and I'm just disgusted with him. And that's the first negative emotion I ever felt towards Father Valentine. But it was so strong and so distinct that I remember it. But it was also confusing as hell because, I mean, dude, it's Father Valentine.
Right, right. Yeah, why am I feeling this?
Right. And, one of my therapists has kind of labeled that as a flash of insight, but that's, so I would have been seventh grade. That was halfway through seventh grade. I would have been older and, you know, two prior incidents had happened. I would have been kind of warming up to stuff. But that's the only negative thought I ever had regarding Father Valentine.
Hmm.
That's, you know, and it wasn't definitive. It's not like I had a flashback to the worst stuff. It's just, why am I feeling this way about Father Valentine? Why does he look disgusting to me?
Hmm.
Uh, I think he'd been touching me. I think that's why I woke up from my nap, and there's a whole bunch of stuff there, but that's the only negative memory I have in my whole life of Father Valentine, and even that is really ambiguous. And that goes to the point of, okay, so why don't people come forward sooner? And it's because even the
Right.
most definitive memories are really, really ambiguous. So,
Hmm.
you know,
Right.
and there had been two prior incidents that were bad, one of which I call special training, which is basically, this is sixth grade or so, Father Valentine. I served a mass for Father Valentine, and then in the sacristy after mass, uh, he taught me some stuff and taught me, kind of showed me around the priest side of the sacristy and taught me some stuff that he shouldn't, taught me some prayers that he shouldn't have taught me. And we did some stuff with some hosts. And I think essentially what ended up happening is he distracted me by giving me a task to do with consecrated hosts. He taught me how to consecrate hosts, which of course he didn't actually. That's like blasphemous to even say that.
Right. Right.
Only a priest can consecrate hosts.
Right.
But he taught me the consecration prayer, and then I had to perform some task of like moving hosts from one bowl to another. And during that time, he was touching me. So he distracted me with the consecrated host tasks at the same time that he was touching me. In that memory, there isn't a whole lot of detail to that, but I do have kind of like compulsions and related to that event, like I compulsively reenact that act, basically. And I actually have another memory of bailing out of the rectory uh, after the worst stuff. I don't know if it was the same day as the special training or not, but one thing is that and that's as close to a Hollywood flashback as you will get. I had tunnel vision and everything. There's a reason they call it tunnel vision because it looks like you're running down a tunnel.
Hmm.
And it's not like you're running down a tunnel, you're just kind of floating down a tunnel. But so I bail out of the rectory and kind of run down Clayton Road, run west on Clayton Road, and then run across the street and dive between some branches. But there was no context to that memory. And that to the point of, okay, so why didn't I say anything sooner? Because even the stuff I remembered, I didn't understand, and it wasn't unambiguously negative. It's
Right.
just, that was kind of weird. I wonder what that means.
Right. And to this day, you still don't know what prompted you running out of the rectory and diving through some bushes or anything. Do you?
Well, I can back up that memory and get some sense of being sitting in the basement of the rectory alone, listening for him. Well, and in my I had some pain down there. Uh, I had been raped, uh, but all the worst stuff was, you know, almost completely obscured from my memory. I have
Right.
enough of a memory, and a lot of what a lot of how I remembered it is via compulsive behavior, but these were compulsions that really didn't start hitting me until I was like 35 or so.
Right. Right.
Compulsive reenactments triggered by moving back to St. Louis. Well, so to your kind of the open question, so I was fine in eighth grade. Now there's a problem where I was actually sexually exploited in high school. I went to a Jesuit high school, St. Louis U High, there was no supervision of the locker room, and certain Jesuits had run of the locker room and used that to their pleasure. Some like to look at the younger guys, some like to watch the younger guys. So certain Jesuits would watch the younger guys shower after PE
Were
class.
they gym teachers or anything? Were there a reason for them to be in there? They would just come into the locker room and watch young guys shower,
Right, there was a bench outside of the shower stalls with a
right?
mirror above it, and they would just sit on that bench. I only took one shower my entire time at St. Louis U High because something happened after my
Right.
first gym class, and I'm like, screw that.
Right.
This is
Yeah,
not this
I'll
is
just
not
go to
safe.
math class sweaty.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And we would, and I was doing it under pain of demerit or jug, but nope,
Right.
never gonna do that again.
And there was never any consequences for that. I mean, didn't anybody come and say, why are the priests sitting in the shower room? I mean, that's crazy. Why don't they
No,
just
we were left to deal with it on our own. The coaches never went into the gym. They would go into, like, I don't even know if they would go in there to do the orientation. We were just kind of left on our own. They would sit in the coach's room, which was
yeah, in
across
their
the
office?
hall,
Yeah.
right, reading magazines and that kind of stuff, and we were just kind of left alone.
Right.
But so I had a really bad high school experience. And this, again, to the point of, this is stuff I only figured out a couple of years ago. I never understood why high school was so terrible for me. And it's because, in the last few years, people have started talking about how, what was going on in the locker room. And a lot of that I had blacked out. And then
Right.
I had another guy, another survivor, another Valentine Dolan survivor from Immaculata talk to me about uh, all the academic difficulties he had. And I'm like, God, at the time I was hearing his story, I'm like, God, I'm so glad that never happened to me. And of course it happened to me. My whole high school was a complete disaster. I failed typing in my first quarter freshman year. I was one of the smartest guys in the class and graduated in the middle of my class with like a 3.1 average because I just couldn't study because I was too busy digging forts and that kind of stuff.
Right. Okay. So let me take you back to one thing that you said,
Yeah.
that I'm really curious about. You said that you had a great eighth grade.
Right.
Okay. So why was that such a vivid memory for you?
I just remember I felt different. I felt completely different. I didn't know why, but
Was
I
it
was just,
was it
I,
because he wasn't there anymore, or you
right.
think that I mean, have you come to that realization that it was just something was lifted from you and you felt more free?
Right. I didn't have to worry about him. I didn't have to worry about what was going to happen next weekend, or,
Right.
it was just a feeling of lightness.
Right. So
But because,
you're smiling as you're reflecting on it. That's great. I mean that you have to, yeah, I guess you have to get to the point where you're putting the memories that make you feel the best in your head,
right,
that I'm glad you have that memory to go back and attach to.
right. But so the thing that saved me was I ended up going to college in Texas. Uh,
Okay.
in Texas, it's just completely different. So for 3.5 years, I was completely free of the stuff. I felt in Texas like I did in eighth grade at Immaculata. And it wasn't until like the second half of senior year when I started thinking about moving back to St. Louis that some of the stuff started kind of
Okay.
creeping back in, and gender confusion
Right.
stuff and that kind of stuff. But so I graduated, lived in St. Louis for 6 months, moved back to Texas, then moved back to St. Louis, then moved back to Texas. And I was just chasing a feeling and trying to get away from St. Louis. And, I just felt weird when I was in St. Louis, and I didn't know why. But I ended up going to grad school, a couple of years after graduating from undergrad, and developed problems with depression as a result of being in St. Louis over the winter, and started to realize that there was something wrong, but I didn't know what the root cause of the problem was. I didn't start understanding the abuse stuff and connecting it to Immaculata and Father Valentine until 2010 at the earliest.
Okay. And
I
this all happened, you said around 1980?
Yeah,
between
this is like 77 to 80,
77 to
81.
80.
In high
Right.
school would be 82 to 86.
Okay. So so probably the best thing would have been just to stay away from St. Louis, because
Right.
it sounds like you were better off not having all those memories and all the streets and the seeing the places and the buildings and everything.
Right.
But
And I was living at home, so I was getting double triggered in therapy. The phrase, the way I started to figure this out was I started to realize that I was quote unquote allergic to St. Louis,
okay. All
because I
right.
started realizing, okay, there's something about St. Louis that's
Right.
causing me problems, but I didn't know what.
Now, were your parents still there? Was your family there? Was there a reason why you were still connected to St. Louis?
Yeah, we
Because
were
it
still
sounds like you're really happy in Texas.
right.
But did you stayed in St. Louis because of
Family, and it made sense, and they were in the same house,
okay.
uh, but so, it made sense financially,
Hmm.
but and I didn't have specific memories of what was going on. I just knew I felt different in Texas,
Right.
but I didn't know why.
Right. Right.
And I didn't start seeing a psychologist, a formal psychologist, until I first learned about cognitive behavioral therapy in like January of 93 or so. But even that wasn't seeing a psychologist. I didn't start discussing Immaculata until 2010.
Okay.
I had talked to psychologists about depression and marital issues because it was rocking my world. It was affecting my marriage. There were lots of problems, but
Hmm.
and that gets to, so Spotlight hits in January 2002. Uh, March 3rd, 2002, my abuser's named in an article by the New York Times, and that just blew me away. And I ended up so that gets picked up by the local press. I end up calling the local press. I called the circuit attorney's office. They never called me back, I think because of a statute of limitations problem. And I called the archdiocese, and my friend the cardinal, at that time it was auxiliary Bishop Dolan, called me back. And he essentially told me nothing happened, which then sent me on kind of a wild goose chase until 2010 or so. So to a degree, I started to have an inkling of some stuff in 2002, and I started being affected by it in 2002. I first started to have a strong sense of it in 2005, but because by 2005, I knew I had a major problem with confession, face-to-face confession. But again, what kept going around in my head is the voice of Bishop Dolan, who told me that nothing happened.
Right.
So it wasn't until 2010 that I'm like, maybe these Valentine things do actually mean something, even though by then, well, by 2010, it would be Cardinal Dolan had told me nothing had happened. Uh,
Now, were you still a practicing Catholic at that time? Were you still going to church and trying to go to confession and doing all that?
Confession, no.
Okay.
I've never been
That's
to,
where my question came from. That would be
no,
very uncomfortable.
no, I've never been to, well, after graduating from Immaculata until 2008, so from 82 to 2008, I never went to confession. Never went in high school, never went in college.
Okay.
I did start to get back into the church when my wife and I were married in 93. And then we started having kids, and I wanted my kids raised with a faith. So by the late 90s, I was trying to get back into the church. And that's, to a degree, that's part of what triggered me. So we moved kind of back and forth, and then we ended up settling in St. Louis in 97, committing to St. Louis in 97, joined a church, started getting into the church, started doing the whole Catholic settling down thing,
Hmm.
which made a lot of sense, but it also triggered the hell out of me.
Right.
And it was, well, and so speaking of confession, so in March 2002, Cardinal Dolan told me my memories didn't mean anything. I told him all the memories that I told you, special training, the mud cave trip, that kind of stuff. He's like, that doesn't mean anything. And he actually sent me to a second psychologist who told me I was just misinterpreting Valentine's intentions. So I go on with my life in 2002. February 2003, my older son makes his first confession. I have a panic attack waiting in line to go to confession because that would have been my first time making confession since, 82.
Right.
February 2005, my older daughter makes her first confession. I accompany her. I have a panic attack during first confession. In 2005, I actually called David Clossie of SNAP, the survivors group, called the New York Times reporters who wrote the article exposing Valentine and basically asked them, do you believe this stuff? And they're like, we wouldn't have run the article if we didn't.
Right.
But I didn't know what to believe about Valentine. I mean, this is one of the greatest people that I ever knew in my entire life. How could he have done anything to me? Plus, Cardinal Dolan told me nothing happened.
Right. Let me go back to Cardinal Dolan and the psychiatrist that he sent you to. So he specifically sent you to a person to evaluate your partial memories.
Right. I told Dolan like 4 memories. He's like, no, that doesn't mean anything. And he told me definitively, I've known Father Valentine forever. We were in the seminary together. We
Right.
lived and worked together at Immaculata. I know
Right.
he didn't do any of the things he's accused of. I know he couldn't do anything to hurt a child. And
Right.
that was
Okay.
good enough for me.
Now,
And then
and
he
you
referred me
walked
to
away
the
and you
psychologist.
believed all that. You believed that, and you believed the psychiatrist was acting in good faith and
Right.
trying to do the best thing that they could for you, for Chris O'Leary, correct?
Right. Right.
Okay. You believe them now?
No.
Okay. So let's come back to that because I kind of understand where the story's going. So let's remember that you agreed that yes, you're right. It's probably nothing. You were still foggy with your memories and all that kind of stuff, but you genuinely believe that was gaslighting or whatever you want to call it. That he knew what Father Valentine actually had done to you and to other young people,
Right.
young boys, I
And
guess.
in part, I know that because of what was going on at the same time. I know of other people. I have one document that talks about someone else who came forward with a complaint about Father Valentine in early March 2002. And I know another guy who was abused by Valentine during confession who came forward at the end of March 2002. So by the end of March 2002, Valentine resigned / is asked to resign as a result of 3 separate allegations. But
Right.
Dolan never got back to him, never circled back to me and say, hey, I know I told you nothing happened, but you're the third guy who came
Okay.
forward.
So he never called and said, "Hey, maybe your memories are right because here's what happened." He's gone. Okay. All right. So that turns into more of a strategy than an honest help of a young person who had some memories that they were trying to figure out.
Right. That's where Dolan in my mind becomes a fixer and starts playing the role of a fixer. His job was to make the problems of 2002 go away.
Got it.
And he's an auxiliary bishop of the Archdiocese of St. Louis at this point. And my friend, he made it very clear to me that we were buddies. This is one friend looking out for another friend, telling
Right.
me that nothing happened.
Right. That's
And
gotta
that's,
hurt.
yeah, that's it. It
Yeah.
was, I took his word. My friend Cardinal Dolan, my friend the Cardinal, told me nothing happened, and I believed him, and that became a refrain in my head. Yeah, but 2003. Yeah, but Cardinal Dolan said nothing happened. 2004, 2005. Yeah, but Cardinal Dolan said nothing happened. 2008, Cardinal Dolan said nothing happened. It wasn't
Well,
until it wasn't
but
until 2010 when I had my 4th breakdown as a result of face-to-face confession that I'm like, okay, obviously I have a major problem with confession, and that really strongly suggests that something happened,
right.
that my memories of face-to-face confession mean something.
Right. Well, and plus he was using the fact that he had such a long relationship with Father Valentine that, I know him, you don't have to worry about him. I've been with him since the seminary. I know that he's perfectly great, everything's wonderful. So he was feeding off that long-term relationship that he had with the person that abused you. So,
And
okay.
I feel like an idiot for believing it, but I didn't know anything at the time. So
Well, yeah, but you can't, that's one of the things that I want everybody to understand that's watching this. Okay, we don't understand how powerful the mind is to
right.
protect us. Okay, and that's what was happening. You were as a young child trying to be protected by your mind from things that you could not understand because you would have no context to them,
Right.
and that they would hurt you so deeply that your mind, because of the grace of God, created our mind to be able to say, okay, I can't deal with that, so I'm not going to think about it. Because if I
Well, and
start
that's
thinking
that's
about it,
that's a point. That's a point I should make. I remembered 95% of it, but I didn't remember 5% of it. And that 5% was the worst stuff. That was just a little slice and a little
right,
sliver that was the definitive stuff.
right. Plus, you
And
were
and
manipulated by people who should have been on the other side of the conversation, saying, "Hey, Chris, tell me what you're seeing." And then I'll try to put some context to it because I know this person and I know how they do things. Okay,
right,
you didn't have any help from the outside to be able to give you some context for memories that didn't make any sense to you. And that's
well,
where
and
that's where
that's
Cardinal Dolan is going to have to face his judgment at the point when he has to say, okay, could I have done something differently with these people that came to me and talked to me about people that I probably had a pretty good understanding were abusing children.
right. And that's an important point of not getting any help, because that was just the first part of a pattern that's continued to this day, where,
Right,
you know, as part of the, despite Spotlight, despite Vos Estis, despite all the talk, I was expected to drive the process.
right.
All the
Well, and
assistance
everybody knew
coordinators,
you couldn't. I mean, that
right,
was the
right,
advantage that well, we'll just leave it to the victims because the victims aren't going to be able to figure this out. And, priests are priests and they couldn't possibly do any of this stuff. So we'll
right,
just leave it to them and they'll never come forward because they won't
right,
be able to figure it out.
right. Let's
Just
put all the burden on the traumatized survivor and see what happens.
right. Okay, let me get I want to talk a little bit about the therapy that you started to go through. Okay, once you started to put all these pieces together, you were saying it was like 2010 or so, where
Right.
you started to have these incidences that you couldn't understand, the confessions of your kids and the first confessions of your kids and all this kind of stuff. So tell me a little bit about how you tried to deal with what were at that point just fragmented memories, but were affecting your life in real physical and emotional ways.
Well, and I should, sorry. So the person that I was seeing in 2010, to be clear, was like the 10th person that I'd seen.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So since like 97 or since 98 or 99, I'd seen a string of psychologists to deal with depression and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
In 2002, because Dolan told me the Valentine stuff didn't mean anything, I started going off in all these kind of crazy directions, looking at adult ADHD and Asperger's syndrome and getting all these prescriptions. The way I describe it is Dolan sent me on a wild goose chase in 2002.
Right.
So from 2002 to 2010, I considered everything except for sexual abuse, except for the Valentine stuff. But by 2010, I was divorced, bankrupt, had lost everything, had lost my job, was having what in the back in the day would be called a nervous breakdown. And I kind of realized in 2010, this is a nervous freaking breakdown. If
Mm.
this was the 50s, people would call this a nervous breakdown.
Right.
And I still had no idea what was going on. And my psychologist and I, all right, and this is an important point. So, all the repressed memory stuff of the 80s, which really kind of traumatized the profession. So as a result, my psychologist ethically wasn't allowed to ask me any questions. no leading questions. So
Because they
I
were
had to
so worried about the repressed memories that
about
I can't
implanting a memory.
possibly say anything that's going to stick something in your head that you're going to say as a memory that you actually experience.
Right. So
They're
it gets to
so
the point,
cautious.
and this is going to sound completely crazy, but it's the God's honest truth. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, so I've got this memory that feels kind of rapey, and there's like this older guy, and I feel like he's raping me. Do you think that means anything? And he feels like a priest, and so there's like this memory of I'm like being raped by a priest, and I'm compulsively recreating this thing where I'm being raped by a priest, and I'm like to my psychologist, think that means anything? What could that possibly mean? And even then he wasn't allowed to say anything. And I'm like, but eventually, after a year or two, I'm like, okay, well, it means exactly what it sounds like it means.
Right.
And these are, so I moved back to St. Louis in 97 and basically committed to St. Louis. And then I had these reactions where I started reenacting what Father Valentine had done to me, the special training stuff and then the worst stuff. And I was compulsively reenacting it.
Now, was
But
that clearing up your memory?
no,
Was
no,
that
no.
helpful? It was just
It just,
compulsive, and it was creating problems in your everyday life. You weren't
right.
gaining anything from it.
No, it just scared the hell out of me. I thought I was a crazy freak. I thought I was going crazy.
Okay.
Uh, am I
You tell one story. Let me just add a couple of these details because I really think this is important. You had said that when you were moving hosts from one bowl to another, that you
Right,
were in the priest side of the sacristy,
right,
and that there was a way to get there that took you 50 feet or something. You had to go from one door to the other door to get into the
right,
sacristy. And you relay this story on one of your podcasts where you had to walk all the way around, and you had to walk like 3 times as far because your mind wouldn't let you walk in the normal direction to get to the place where this abuse happened.
right. So I'm serving with T and D, and I'm standing in the door, and to my left, like right there, 3 feet from me is the spot where the special training stuff happened, and I'm unable to cross the threshold of the door to walk the 20 feet to the stage right door because I need to light a candle or something like that, and that's where the candle extenders are. The
Right.
things with the wicks that you
Yeah,
could
yeah,
reach
you light
down.
them and then you hang them. Yeah, put the candle,
I
light the
need to
candle.
get I need to get one of those. And I'm standing in the threshold of the door right next to the spot where the special training memory happened. And T and D are over there, and they're just kind of in the priest side of the sacristy, and I cannot set foot in the priest side of the sacristy. So, like you said, instead of walking the 15 or 20 feet, I instead walk 150 feet all the way around. So so I literally don't set foot in the priest side of the sacristy. But I don't know why. I just
Right,
know that I'm physically unable to set foot in there voluntarily. And there would be a couple times where, the priest would say, okay, guys, it's time to go. And I would walk through there, but I would just walk through, tunnel vision, eyes on the door, just getting through there as quickly as possible to the
right,
point where I can't even remember anything that's off to the right of the sacristy.
right,
But it didn't mean anything to me. But what it did mean is that I noticed at the time, I'm like, why can T and D do this and I can't do
yeah,
that?
yeah. But the value came later on when you were an adult trying to figure all this stuff out and going, okay, that's weird. There's the reason why my body will not allow me to do that. There has to be something that's important. Plus the fact that it was creating havoc in your life as
Right.
an adult. That
Well, and so in what I would do in therapy was I started looking for those, well, that was weird memories. And
right, right,
anything that was kind of rapey or had to do with,
right.
front stuff or back stuff or stuff down there. And, And eventually it came out and I started remembering enough that I knew what was going on. But unfortunately, by that point, it was too late for me to file a valid lawsuit, and I wasn't able to. I ended up filing a lawsuit in October 2015, but there was a statute of limitations problem that had been created by Dolan, I believe deliberately. So I ended up having my settle my lawsuit for 15 grand, netted 9 in September 2017.
Wow. So tell me, you were saying that you thought that at that time Archbishop Dolan, or was it Cardinal Dolan, about the statute of limitations? Tell me a little bit about that, because that was intriguing.
Well, I think the whole point of the wild goose chase that Dolan sent me on in 2002 was to create a problem with the statute of limitations.
Extend the time. One less victim that comes within the statute of limitations window.
Right, and that happened again. So I'm not an idiot. By 2011, by May 2011, I start to get the sense that something's going on. That my Valentine Immaculata memories mean something. So I go back to the Archdiocese of St. Louis. First contact them Easter week 2011, meet with them May 2011 after Easter, and ask them a simple question, which is, are you guys sure this stuff doesn't mean anything? Dolan in 2002 told me it didn't mean anything. This woman told me it didn't mean anything. And first they're like, okay, what are you talking about, Dolan? We don't have any record of your conversation with Cardinal Dolan. We don't have any record of your conversation with anyone else in 2002. We have no idea what you're talking about.
So you were not even on the record.
Right.
I mean, even after talking to Archbishop Dolan and going to the psychiatrist that he sent you to, there was no record of that conversation. So you were not even on the victim list.
Right.
Or potential victim list, I guess, at that point. Okay.
Right. And to that point, that's a problem, because so that's 2011. I again tell them I'm a survivor, and they actually produced a legal document in 2014 to the court, and they still left me off of that legal document, that victim list. I believe in an effort to protect Dolan. I think what they're trying to do is create a narrative that, okay, Valentine was a bad guy, but he didn't do anything until after Dolan, and until after Dolan went to DC.
And you were probably the only victim that brought Dolan into the conversation, because you had a personal relationship with him. The other
there was one other guy that I know of, the guy who came forward in late March 2002, who I've since talked to. He first contacted me in November 2018, and we had a lot of conversations in early 2019. I know that he could connect Dolan and Valentine.
Did he go to Dolan though?
Yes.
Oh, he did.
Well, he went to Dolan in late March 2002.
Was that documented?
I don't know. Well,
that'd be interesting to know, because if they're trying to free Dolan from everything that happened in St. Louis, you know,
I know he talked to lawyers, but I don't know whether those lawyers ever issued a letter or if he just made a phone call. Gotcha. Now, what would happen at the time is that you would call into the hotline, leave a message, and then Dolan's secretary would type that message up into a memo that would then be given to Dolan, and Dolan would work off of that memo.
Right.
And essentially what happened is that memo was disappeared from Father Valentine's file. And I actually, in this kind of crazy coincidence that I suspect is an act of God, found one of those memos in the file of a different abuser. It should not have been in the place where I was able to find it, but wow. I found it. It's ridiculous how big of a coincidence that is. But
maybe it's not a coincidence.
You never know.
Tell me a little bit about, as we're going to try to wrap up here, because we've been going for quite some time. I'm fascinated though. I mean, yeah. It's an amazing story.
And I've got sweat running down my back. I'm so triggered. So, but what else you got?
Okay. Well, if we need to take a break, let me know.
I'm okay. I'm just sweaty. That's just how I
Okay.
get. I get hot.
Okay. All right. Well, turn the air conditioning on or something in there. Tell me a little bit about the reparation mass and the r- I don't know what term we use, the re-traumatization or how you were treated by people that should have cared about you because they know at this point that you're a victim, but you're standing with the photo and all these priests are in the foreground and you're trying to get some type of recognition during a reparation mass for sexual abuse victims. Can you
Right.
tell me just a little bit about what happened and then how you felt when you're constantly feeling like you're being rejected and isolated from the church community?
Well, and fortunately, so that mass was September 7th, 2018, the massive reparation for the sex abuse crisis after the Pennsylvania grand jury report kind of set off this wave.
Okay.
Fortunately, I had been given a preview of that. The Archdiocese of St. Louis in May 2013 permanently removed Father Valentine and never contacted me, warned me, or offered me any help. So I'd gotten used to their shunning me.
Oh wow.
And then in January 2014, the Archdiocese of St. Louis produces a document under court order and omits me from that document. So again,
Hmm.
I've already had this sense of not existing. So thank God I wasn't completely surprised. But so they decide to hold this massive reparation. They don't nobody called me to let me know that it was happening. There's no general, hey, survivors are welcome. If you're a
Oh,
survivor,
you're
could you
the
come on
last person they would call.
down?
I mean, if they're trying to eliminate your name from every document to protect, adding another victim plus protecting, Cardinal Dolan, you're the last person they're calling.
Right, but I didn't understand it at the time. I only figured out the Dolan stuff in the last year or so.
Okay.
But so I go down there and I'm holding two pictures. One is the picture from the mud cave trip of the me, the flannel shirt guy, and the number shirt guy. And
Right.
then there's another picture of T from the Riskin Pizza Party, and then another guy named P. So I'm holding those two pictures and just standing in front of the Cathedral Basilica. Before, I get there like 45 minutes in advance. To their credit, two different groups of women did come up and talk to me. Two women who work for the Archdiocese, and they kind of expressed concern, and they're like, we don't like what's going on, but we can't do anything about it. Then there was a second group, a couple of nuns, short hair, comfortable shoes nuns, not the habit nuns. The habit nuns are actually the habit nuns are actually the worst because they're the ones who will never interact with me or acknowledge me. The order nuns are the worst. Uh, but so I'm standing there, and then not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing what the plan is, and then all of a sudden the priests they come around the corner and start assembling on the plaza. So I'm like 50 feet from the doors of the Cathedral Basilica, standing as close as I can legally stand without their calling the cops on me, with my toes up against the steps that lead up to. So essentially, there's one flight of stairs, then there's a plaza, then there's another flight of stairs, a short plaza, and then the doors into the Cathedral Basilica. And the priests are assembling on that kind of top plaza, like 30 or 40 feet from me.
Hmm.
And it's effectively all the priests of the Archdiocese of St. Louis. I'm like, okay, this will be interesting. Uh, but they stood there for like 15 minutes or so. And it became increasingly obvious that they had been, well, so I'd already had this sense of not existing. And that sense of not existing is something that happens as a result of the abuse. Because if you can't physically escape your abuser, which I couldn't because I was a kid and he was a huge guy, I just kind of escaped into my mind. I dissociated.
Right.
So I have problems with dissociation. And what happened is that the longer the priests would stand there, and they wouldn't even they wouldn't even look at me. And it was weird because there was this one guy, I think who was a priest at my kind of now former parish, and I'm being shunned by my parish too. So and that started in February 2018. So I had some sense of shunning already. Uh, but I get this, I just had this growing feeling of not existing, and all the priests of the Archdiocese of St. Louis are standing in front of me. This one priest turns and looks in my direction, but instead of looking at me, he's looking over me. And he does this complete scan, and his eyes just go right over me. But it's very obvious that he's been instructed not to look at me, and nobody would look at me. And it was the strangest thing, and I didn't realize how deeply it was affecting me until I tried to leave, and I'd realized that my entire body was locked up. Every muscle in my body was locked up. Like, I tried to take a step and I fell down because my body was just completely rigid. And it was that feeling of not existing. And it's almost indescribable to say how hard it was for that to be done by priests. These are the living representatives of Jesus Christ on earth, and they're treating me like I literally don't exist. And it was very difficult. And eventually I noticed that there was a photographer, and the worst part was it was happening all out in the open. The place was crawling with press. I had talked to a photographer, and he's like, stay there because we've got a guy covering this and he'll want to talk to you. And then eventually I see that photographer, and he's up on the facade of the cathedral basilica. And I'm like, what the hell is he doing? Because he's like climbing on the facade. I'm like, dude, just walk behind me and get a picture of this. And eventually I realized what he was doing was trying to capture the scene, but instead of doing it from behind me, he was doing it from in front of me so that he could capture the faces of the priests in front of my face, which was a much more effective way of kind of capturing it. But the priests, there were 100, 150 priests there, and nobody would look at me. And it was the most surreal, horrible, stunning thing that I've ever experienced.
No
But the
one,
thing,
no one should ever have to experience that.
no, it was like, you know, it was like Christ on the cross. That was my connection to Christ on the cross. Uh,
Say what you think about what you're doing right now in relation to what you just said.
well, so the last time I've been to Mass was Easter 2014. I had a flashback, had to leave, ended up watching the movie The Passion of the Christ twice, and realized that if Jesus Christ can do what he did on Palm Sunday, entering Jerusalem to a certain and known fate, then I can do this. And that's what kept going through my head when I was standing there on the steps of the Cathedral Basilica on September 7th, 2018. So in terms of my faith, I'm not much of a Catholic because I can't stand to attend Mass, but in some ways it's actually strengthened my faith because I've felt that connection to Jesus Christ. And as horrible as what happened at the Mass of Reparation was, it let me really get what Jesus was about and what he did and how difficult that was and how amazing that was. And I'm not anything close to Christ, but I do feel that connection to him that I don't know, I never really felt before, but I certainly feel now. So it's, if Jesus Christ could do what he did, then I can do this in terms of doing what's necessary, both to get justice for survivors and also to protect kids and ensure that what happened to me won't and can't happen anymore. And it's not just about the Mass of Reparation. There's Vos Estis Lux Mundi, which was supposedly a Bill of Rights for survivors that the Pope passed, but nobody will enforce that. And the Archdiocese of St. Louis continues to shun me and treat me with indifference despite everything that Vos Estis says. And it's no fun, but if Jesus Christ can do what he did, then I can do this, and it's necessary, and it's important, and it's not any fun at all, but I think it's necessary, and I can do it. So that's kind of where I am in terms of my faith. I'm not much of a Catholic anymore, but I am a Christian, and I do have an affinity towards the Catholic Church, and having been raised in it, and I understand, you know, the Mary stuff, and I understand the saints. I understand the saints stuff really well. Saints are living models of Jesus Christ. If thinking about Jesus Christ as your example is a little bit too much, you've got plenty of examples of Christ or of saints who followed Christ's example. So, I really get that and respect that and understand it, and I'm just trying to kind of model my behavior and my actions off of that. So
Right.
I don't know. I don't know where it's going to take me. I just know I'm not going to stop until it can't happen again, and we're certainly not at that point.
No, no, we're certainly not at that point. Just a couple reflections. Um, you are more Catholic and Christian than any of those priests that couldn't look you in the eyes and touch your soul because they weren't strong enough to deal with it.
Right.
And they
Thank
were
you.
either told or manipulated or whatever the situation was, they couldn't look you in the eyes because they knew if they did, they would understand what they did as an organization and as a hierarchy to you and a lot of other people. And they just couldn't possibly handle that.
Right.
But ultimately, they're going to have to face the final judgment. Okay. And Chris, I honor you because you're able to look at the people in the eyes and to see their pain because you understand it. And you're also willing and strong enough to be able to say, I don't understand all this stuff, but I know something happened to me that should never have happened, that should never even have been a thought in Father Valentine's mind. And for Father Dolan to do whatever he did, because you know that if Father Valentine was doing that to other people, the other priests that lived with that person probably understood what was going on. So I honor you. I just hope that you continue to speak out. If I can help in any way to help you with that effort, just keep finding as many victims as you possibly can, look them straight in the eye and tell them, I've been there, I can help you. Let's walk together and figure out how we deal with this stuff.
No, thanks. Thank you for everything. You're doing
I'll
the
tell you,
Lord's work.
well, Christ is looking a lot more beneficially at you than he was at all those priests that were looking over the top of your head because they didn't want to be connected to somebody that they knew the church didn't treat as well as they should have.
And the
So,
priests were still following those illegal and immoral orders. If people want to talk about how much things have changed, but you still have priests following at least immoral orders.
yep. Well, and you brought up the Vocestus. I mean, that's a conversation for another time because that's where we have to go. Okay, we have to take care of the victims, and we have to understand their plight and what terrible circumstances that the church created for them, and try to help them as best we can. But ultimately, we got to get to the point where the church that hopefully you will come back to is one that's worthy of Chris O'Leary,
Right.
because right now it's not worthy of somebody as thoughtful and as honest and as trying to make things better as you are. So
Well,
hopefully we'll get a
thank you.
church that's worthy of you. Right now it's not, but
Well,
we're going to work on
unfortunately, right. That's the plan, is to do everything I can to help. So
it. Exactly. Exactly. Thank you very much. I appreciate all the time.
thank you. I'm gonna go driving.
Go, open up the windows, let the wind blow through that little hair that you got. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. It's been good. It's helpful. It's not fun, but it's necessary. So,
Good. I'm glad. Thanks so much.
all right, good. I'll talk to you.
All right. Bye bye.